Thanks for tuning in to part 2 of my Google Budget series. In part 1, I showed you how to create a budget in Google Sheets that will tell you exactly how much money you'll have in 3, 6, or even 12 months. In part 2, I'll teach you how to create a fully functional automated report in Google Data Studio, which is free, that will help you track how much income you've earned and how much you are spending compared to your income. It'll show negative and positive spending trends and what you are spending your money on. We have a ton to cover, so let's dig in. Okay, so I'm currently inside of Google Data Studio where I can open any reports that I've created in the past, or I can open a blank report and I can create one from scratch. Before I go any further, I do want to touch on how to get into this page. Even though Google Data Studio is completely free, they don't have it listed in their honeycomb over here for some reason. All you need to do is a Google search for Google Data Studio. It will appear as the first search result, so just click on it. Then you'll get a screen like this. Just click on Use It for Free. From there, you'll get to the screen I was just showing you earlier. More than likely, if you try to click on Blank Report, you're going to get brought to a welcome screen. Just follow those steps until you get back to the home page. Okay, I've gone through all the welcome screens and now I'm ready to start creating my budget report. If you haven't watched my earlier video around creating your own one-year budget in Google Spreadsheets, just know that you'll need a Google Spreadsheet with the columns titled Date, Description, Category, Income, Debits, and Running Balance. If you have that, you should be good. Otherwise, I'd mark this one to watch later and go watch that video first. I'm going to assume you've done one of those two things as I go through this video. So I'm going to click on Blank Report and we'll get started. Once I click on Blank Report, it's going to ask me to connect some data. I'm going to choose Google Spreadsheets because I'm going to want to connect a budget that I created in Google Sheets. Now, as long as you use the same Google login to create the Google Sheets budget, you should see it listed here. I'm going to click on Budget Spreadsheet. Now, if you remember, in Google Sheets Budget, you had multiple sheets created. You should see all of them listed here. Everything that we will pull for this video will be from the final tracker sheet, so I'm going to ensure that that is selected. From there, I'm going to choose Add. You'll see a pop-up like this one. Just click on Add to Report. So once you get in here, it should pre-populate a chart. And if you aren't familiar with Google Data Studio, this could look all very intimidating. Trust me, we'll work through this together and it'll be easy by the time you're done. The first chart I want to add to my report is one that will track my income. Before I can do that though, I need to understand what adjustments I need to make over here on the right. You'll notice a few sections over here. I'll list them and then we'll go through each one and make adjustments together, and I'll explain them as we go. You have date range dimensions, then the dimension, then the metric, how many rows per page, then a summary section, a sort section, a secondary sort section, a default date range section, and a filter section. We're really only going to use a few of these in our report. Let's look up here at the date range dimension. This is always going to be listed as date for the report that we are looking at. By choosing date, you are telling Data Studio that you want all the data that we are about to add to be tracked on a day-to-day basis. It'll make a bit more sense later. Next, we're going to tell Google Data Studio what we want to use for the dimension. We really have to look at this like we are putting a table together. For instance, let's say that in the first column of the table, we are going to list the different sources of income that we have. In the second column, we're going to list the amount in dollars that each income source is. So in terms of the dimension, think of it as Data Studio asking you what you want to put in the first column of that table. Since I want to track the name of the income source in the first column, I have to figure out what column of the spreadsheet that is going to be in. If I look at the spreadsheet, I can see that the income source descriptions are in the description column. So that part of the table is already correct. But if I look at the table, it's counting how many of each paycheck I have on the spreadsheet, not the dollar amount. I need to make a change there. Since I only want to track income in this table, I'm going to tell Data Studio that I want the metric in the table to be income. I can do that either by dragging and replacing the existing record count with income, or by simply clicking on record count and clicking on income instead. Whatever is easier for you. Now you might notice that the sum is listed there, but it's not showing as currency. That's because we need to go back to the dataset and tell Data Studio to use currency instead of a plain number. I can do that by clicking on the little edit tool right up next to the data source. Now I can choose how to display each category. So if I want debits, income, and running balance to show as currency, I can choose that by selecting it from the dropdown. More than likely, your country's currency will show up at the top. Once I have all three of them changed to currency, I can click Done and move on. You should notice it as showing as currency on your table now. I like to show the total amount of income at the bottom of the table. You can do that by clicking the checkbox that says Show Summary Row. Now it'll show the grand total in the table. Now we'll sort the income sources. You can choose to sort the table by the amount of total income for each source, or by the name of the paycheck. You can also choose to sort ascending or descending for both. The next step is to decide what date range you want to show these numbers as. For instance, do you want to show them from month to date, year to date, or for the next 30 days, or for the past 60 or 90 days? It's really up to you. If you want to show a specific date range each time you pull up the report or each time you have it emailed to yourself, you can choose Customize. From there, you can click on the dropdown and then choose a date range manually using the calendar. Or if you want to get fancy, you can click on the dropdown up here and it'll give you a bunch of predetermined ranges like this month or last month, this quarter or that quarter. Now I will say that I like to keep the default range as auto because I'm going to show you how to add a date range selector right to your report later. Alright, so the last thing we need to do is add filters. Since I want to only look at the income in this table, I want to filter out anything that isn't the name of one of my paychecks from the description column. I can do that by clicking on Add Filter. Now from here I'm going to choose to include in the category field is equal to, and then I'm going to type income. This is basically saying that I want to exclude any other category other than income. Now watch what happens to the table when I save it. You should only see your sources of income listed there now. The last thing I'm going to show you for this table is some formatting options. Instead of my headers in this column reading description and income, I want them to read income source and total amount. To change the description column, I'm going to click on the little ABC icon right next to where it says description. That should give you a blank line where it'll allow you to change the name. I'll title it income source, and you should see it change in the table's header. I'm going to do the same thing for the metric column. I'll click on the word sum and then type in total amount and hit enter. Now I want to remove the row numbers over here and rid of the pagination down here. Right now I'm on the data tab. I'm going to click on the style tab. From there I'm going to scroll down to where the box is checked for row numbers, and I'm going to uncheck that. I'm also going to uncheck the box that says show pagination. Now the only thing left to do is resize this table a bit. Then I'm going to move it down a bit and make room for some drop-down options at the top of the report, which we'll add later. Now this is where I usually pick my report's style. I'll do that by clicking anywhere on the page that isn't inside of your first chart so that you deselect your first chart. From there, the right side of your screen should turn into theme and layout options. This is where you can choose how your report will look. I'm a big fan of the black background with charcoal charts and graphs, but you can choose whatever theme you want. You can switch between viewing your report and editing your report at any time. If you want to view the report you're creating, you can go up here and click on View. If you want to edit it again, you can click up here on Edit, and it'll bring you back to the Edit page. Now I'm ready to add my second table, which will be an income versus debit bar chart. It'll show us how much income we have earned compared to how much money we spend in any past or future date range. I'm going to do that by clicking on Add a Chart from the ribbon. From there, I'm going to choose a horizontal bar chart. Now I'm going to place it right below the last table by waiting for the red lines to show up indicating we are aligned. Now I have to basically go through the same steps that I went through at the previous table. I'm going to keep the date range dimension as date, but now I need to decide what to use as the dimension. Again, even though we are creating a bar chart, think of the dimension as the titles on the axis over here. I want the date range to be on this axis, so I'm going to choose date as the dimension. Right now, it's only showing me income in the metrics. I want it to show income and debits so I can compare the two. So under metrics, I'm going to click on Add Metric. From there, I'll select debits. Now you can see that it shows income versus debits for each date range. But I don't necessarily want this to show the income versus debits for every single date. I want to drill down a bit. I'm going to do that by clicking on the Drill Down slider under Date in Dimension. Right now, it's looking at all three dimensions of the date. It's looking at the date, the month, and the year. I really only want to look at the year, so I'm going to remove year, month, and date. Now you can see that the graph updated to only show one line for income and one line for debits. Now when I add a date range selector at the top of my report, this graph will update to show how much income and how much in debits there was in 2020 during your specified date range. There's just a few things left to do on this chart and then we can move on. First, I'm going to apply a filter to rid of the section of the graph that is showing income for the year null. I don't want that on there, so I'm going to filter that out. I do that by clicking on Adding a Filter, and then Creative Filter. Now I'm actually going to name this filter because I think we'll be able to use it later and save time. I'll title this one as Null Date. Now I'm going to exclude any date that is null, and then click Save. And then when I click Save, it'll rid of any date listed as null. Now I'm going to do one more thing really quick, and then I promise we'll move on. I want to add data labels to both bars so it shows the exact dollar amount. I do that by clicking on the Style tab, and then click on Show Data Labels. Now you can see the dollar amounts at the end of the bars. Now if you wanted to, you could change the color of the bars right here too, but I'm not going to do that. Now I'll just resize the chart a bit and I can move on. The next thing I'm going to do is add a chart that will tell me the lowest balance my checking account will hit and what date it will hit that amount. I'll do that by adding another chart. I'll make this one a table. I'll drag it right underneath the other ones and line it up using the red line down the middle and making sure the spacing is correct by using a little blue guides between the charts. Alright, now I need to figure out what my dimensions and metrics will be for this table. I know that I want this chart to show the lowest balance that I'll see in my checking account and when that'll happen. So I know the dimension will need to be date. So I'm going to leave both the date range dimension and the dimension as date. And I'm not going to drill this down to month or year because I want to know the exact date I'll see the lowest balance. In the metrics column, I'm going to choose running balance. You can already see that one of the dates listed there is null. I'm going to rid of that by adding my date is null filter that I created earlier. Now I need to sort this smallest to largest in terms of running balance so that my lowest balance is on top. So I'll change the sort to ascending. Right now this is showing the smallest 8 to 10 running balances. I want it to show only the smallest. I can do that by changing how many rows per page are shown from 100 to 1. Now I'm going to rid of the row numbers and page nation under the Style tab. Now I can just resize it. The last thing I want to do to this table is add some formatting that will turn the dollar amount red if it's under $500. I can do that from the Style tab as well. At the very top of the Style tab, you should see an option to add conditional formatting. When I click on that, I'll need to choose my options now. I'm going to keep this a single color instead of a color scale, since we only have one number. Now I need to choose what column of the table to apply the formatting to. I'm going to choose to apply it based on what is in the running balance column. Now I need to tell Data Studio to apply this formatting only if the running balance you see is below $500. So I'll choose less than from the dropdown and then add 500 to the value field. Now I'll choose to apply it only to one column instead of the entire row, and I want the text to turn red if the balance goes below 500. Now I can just hit save. Now that number should be red if it's below 500, which mine is. This chart is telling me that the lowest balance of my checking account at any point will be $372 on November 5th. I don't like the title of the balance column though. I'm going to change that to lowest balance by clicking on the sum and adding a title. Now I'm ready to add my next chart in the report. This one will be a pie graph that will summarize how much I spend in each expense category. It'll show where I'm spending the most money and where I'm spending the least amount of money. So I'll add another chart and pick pie graph. Then I'll line it up to the top of the first chart using the red line. I'm going to resize this one and drag it down to the bottom of the last chart again using the red lines. I'm going to leave the date range dimension alone, but I am going to change the dimension from description to category. This way I'll break my spending down into categories like bills, fun, student loans, or etc. Now we need to change the metric to debits instead of income because I want to track how much I'm spending in each category. There's a few categories I need to filter out there though. I don't want income to have a slice, so I'm going to filter that out. I'll do that by scrolling to the bottom and adding a new filter. Then create a new filter. I'm going to title this one Remove Income Category because I might need to use that later. Now I need to exclude the category that equals income. Now I can hit save. I also want to get rid of the starting balance category because technically that's income. I'll do it the same way. Add a filter, create a filter, name it starting balance category, exclude the category that is equal to starting balance. Now it's up to you to decide if you want to show the legend. If you'd like, you could remove the legend and the categories and the dollar amounts would still show up when you hover over each slice. Up to you, but I like removing the legend. I do that by clicking on Style, then scrolling down to the legend section and then choose the one that says None. It makes the pie graph bigger and easier to see. Since that's a bit bigger, I'm going to make this section a bit thinner so that I can fit my next chart a bit better. Now if I click on the view at the top and hover over each category, it'll give me the name of the category and the dollar amount. Now I'm going to go back to the edit page because I want to add 2 more charts and some extra filters at the top yet. The next chart I want to add will look at the top 10 expenses in the category I choose. It'll make sense in a second here, I promise. I'll start by adding a new chart and choosing the table option. I'll line it up using the red line and then I'll resize it using the Snap To feature. This table defaults to showing me the top categories and dollar amounts. I want the top descriptions and dollar amounts. Right now the top expense is groceries, gas, household needs. When I change the dimension to description instead of category, the top expense becomes the credit card that I pay off each month, followed by my mortgage payment. Now I'm going to filter out any income, my starting balance, and then any transfers. So if I scroll down to add a filter, most of the filters I need should already be there. I can click on Remove Income, I can also filter out starting balance. Now I just need to create one for transfer. I'll do that by adding a filter, clicking on Create Filter, name it Exclude Transfer, and then exclude any category that is equal to transfer. Now I'm left with my top expenses. Now I'll just click over to the Style tab and remove row numbers and pagination. In a minute, I'm going to show you how to look at these by category, not just as a whole. But let's create our next graph and then we'll put the finishing touches on our report. The last chart I want to add is a line graph that shows our spending trends on a timeline for each category. For instance, did I spend more on groceries this month than last month? I'm going to do this by adding another chart and then choosing Time Series Chart. I'll snap it into place using the red lines and the snap feature. Now I'm going to change this axis to show the month of the year rather than the actual true dates. I'll do that by drilling down the dimension, which is automatically set to date in the time series chart. I'm going to remove the date and the year. Right now this time series is tracking the running balance in my checking account. I wanted to track the debits in each category instead. Now this is where it gets a bit tricky. Since this axis over here is always going to be the dollar amount, I need to add the category dimension to this axis somehow. I'll do that by adding a breakdown dimension in the dimension area. I'll add category here. Then instead of having the running balance as the metric, I need to have debits as the metrics. That way it shows me how much in debits each category had each month. In a minute, I'll show you how to look only at one category at a time. Alright, now that I have all of my charts and graphs added, I'm going to give myself a few options. I want to be able to look only at all of this information during a certain date range. I also want to look at it by certain categories or certain transactions. I'll do that by adding some filter dropdowns at the top where I left some room. The first thing I'm going to do is add a date range selector. I'll do that by clicking up here on Add a Control. From there, I'll pick Date Range Control. I'll drag that over my first column of charts and resize it a bit. Now as long as you left the date range on all of your charts as auto, this date range picker should be ready to go. If I go over here on View and then change the dates in the date range picker, you should see all the data in my charts change. Pretty cool. Now I'm going to add a filter that will allow me to only look at certain categories for my 10 highest transactions chart over here and my time series chart down here. First I need to go back to the edit page. Then I'll click on Add a Control and choose Drop Down List. Then I'll place it and resize it. Now I need to show you something here. I'll go to the View look. Now if I choose one category, it's going to change the data for all of the graphs. I don't want that. I only want it to change the 10 highest expense graph and the time series chart. So back on the edit page, I need to make a few adjustments. If I right click on the drop down for the date range, you'll see that I have an option to make this report range level. I'm going to click on that. This filter will now be applied to every chart or table that I have set to report level or page level. It'll make sense in a second. Now I'm going to keep the category drop down at page level. Basically that means that this filter will only work for graphs that are at page level. Now I just need to decide which charts will be at page level and which ones will be at report level. I'm going to keep the 10 highest transactions at page level. This means that since the date range selector is report level, which is all of the pages, the 10 highest transactions chart will change with the date range. It also means that this chart will change when the category is picked. Next, I want to change the income sources chart to report level, because I only want it to change with the date range, but not with the category selector, since the category filter is only page level. I'll do the same thing with the income versus debits chart. And I'll also do the same thing with the category pie chart. However, I want the time series chart down here to be at page level. That's because I want it to be changed when I change the date range, and I also want the category filter to work on this chart. If I pick one category, I only want it to show that category on this chart to make it easier to read. To show you how this works, I'll go to the View setting. If I change the date range to September, you can see that all charts change. But if I change the category filter to Household Bills Needs, you can now only see that the 10 highest transactions only show for that one specific category, and the time series chart only shows that one category. I'll change the date range to this year so that you can see it more clearly. It's nice to be able to see spending trends in each category, but what if I wanted to see a spending trend for each specific transaction? For example, what if I wanted to see if my phone bill has been going up or down over the past few months? I'm going to add our final drop-down filter by clicking on Add a Control and then Drop-Down List. Snap it into place and resize it. Now I shouldn't really need to change anything here. It's already set up for description in the dimension and debits in the metrics. The only thing I need to do is make this drop down page level, which it looks like it already is, because this one is giving me the option to change the report level. I should be good to go. So now I'll click over to View again. I'll leave the date range as this year. I'll change the category to Household Bills Needs again. Now, since I only want to look at my phone bill trend, I'm going to choose it from the description dropdown. Now when I look at the time series chart, it's only looking at the phone bill dollar amount. I'll prove it to you. If you go back and change this to include all the descriptions in this category, the dollar amount and the time series will go up. The last thing I'm going to show you how to do is set up an automatically scheduled copy of this sent to your email on a recurring basis. I'll do that by clicking on the drop-down arrow next to the share button at the top. From there, I'll click on Schedule Email Delivery. From there, you can choose who you want to email it to, customize the email subject line, and choose when and how often you'll get this report. And there you go. You have a sweet budget report that you can keep track of your expenses with. You also have a ton of knowledge in Google Sheets and Google Data Studio. I just taught you how to work smarter instead of harder. Imagine if you could take some of these skills and more back with you to work. I'll bet you'd start making more money. If you want that, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and hit the bell notification so that you can get free videos like this one every week. Also, feel free to browse other videos on my channel. I think a couple of them should be popping up right now. See you next week.